I worked as an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes the day before they aired. I'll get right into it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had recently made a SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators off to a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, a phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Belive, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it was more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy and Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is where things began to scene off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. This, there is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they began to boo at him. Not normal cartoon booing that is very common in the show, but you would very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in the center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone in hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed, clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a little bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question the appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out his porthole window is the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part at this point is there's no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in the silence for about 30 seconds, and then he started to sob softly. He put his hands over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. At the while, a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through the forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at 10 shots a second from apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on himself, but for the split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is this sound, and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as the sound the studio likes to have, they didn't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals, and it never lasted for more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangling over the upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and the entrails laying beside him. He was lying on some pavement that would probably be a road. The most unsettling part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that this was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing and louder than before, and half a body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you would get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were that gale blowing through the forest. There now was even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing, deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out, and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her above circle, crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on a straight, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward was silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism like the others were at the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. In about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. The fear most inducing of all his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up, but this time the photo was of a boy. About the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different. But we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. They started hands softly landed down the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames the kid beginning to blink. The lead editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down here, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of face. For about 3 seconds, the shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters at the wall behind him. And his bed, he just flies and backs with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, his one side eye dangling for what's left of the head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left in the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served the imprint of the eternity of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze what happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp was of mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time. But everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody knows. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child was seen identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed the unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have, something happened, and I can't prove anything of it beyond anecdotal evidence. I think twice about things.